back in the hills of Perthshire when there were still crofts and sheep farming, there lived a little girl with her father. And one midsummer, she was collecting primroses on the hills around Perthshire, and she came across fairies making merry on the hillside, singing beautiful songs. And she was so enchanted by the music that she skulked around the little headland just to get a look. And when she saw the fairies dancing and singing, she clapped her hands. She was really excited. But fairies don't like to be seen by humans. So as soon as she made herself known and her presence fell to the fairies, they all fled into their holes and burrows so they were not to be seen. The little girl was absolutely enchanted with what she'd seen, and so she dashed back to her father, who lived in a little stone croft on the hillside, and she told him all about what she'd seen. The father nodded and smiled and said very little, for he knew that trouble was afoot. Fairies hate being seen by humans, and if you're not really careful, they'll come and they'll steal you away. You'll be stolen by fairies. This, of course, is the title of our story. When the little girl had finished telling her father all about what she'd seen, and she'd had her tea, and the father tucked her up in bed, kissed her good night, she fell into a dreamy sleep. He had things to do. He got on his riding boots and he saddled his horse, and he headed to the next village to see old wise Sarah, the lovely white witch that lived in the next village. And he rode and rode through the night until he got to a door, and then bang, 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 he hammered on it. She opened. And he sat by the fire and he told her everything that had happened. She looked very serious. She looked very worried. She said, "This isn't good. Chances are that the fairies are going to come and try and steal your daughter away, probably around midnight, so you've got a few hours yet." "Oh, what shall I do?" said the farmer. "What shall I do?" She said. So I do know of families who have avoided having their children taken by fairies. The way you do it is you must make your house very quiet. If it's really quiet, the fairies won't steal your daughter away. "Aha," said the farmer. So he jumped back on his horse and he galloped back to his croft, and he looked around for all of those things that were likely to make a noise. The first thing he did was he unbridled his horse and took the saddle off, and he also took the plough horse that he'd got, and he sent them out into the far fields so that they wouldn't make a noise and they'd be settled for the night. And then he looked to his dogs, his loyal sheepdogs. And you know what he did? He fed them a great big saucer of milk and a huge chunk of meat. And they ate and they drank. Oh my goodness, they must have thought, whoa, what have we done for this? But they were so full at the end of it that they settled straight down to sleep. And he locked them away in their kennel. And then he went to the pigsty, and the pigs, and he gave them loads and loads of straw and oats and all sorts of things. And they also settled down to a nice sleep. And then the farmer went inside his croft and he dampened down the fire so none of the sparks would make any noise, and he stopped the clocks all around his farmhouse, and he sat still and quiet in the darkness and waited. Round midnight he could hear music and the sound of tiny, tiny, tiny hooves. It was the fairies approaching, and they stopped outside the door. They knew something was afoot. This house was too quiet, so they were nervous, but presently they entered the house. They came pouring through the keyhole. They came pouring under the door. They came in through the cracks in the window. Hundreds and hundreds of fairies, and they spread out all over the croft. Tiny, tiny little people. And the farmer sat still and watched. Fairies headed upstairs looking for his daughter, but of course all was still and quiet. The farmer sat still, and then to his dismay he heard the barking of a dog. Oh no! He'd forgotten that his daughter's pet dog, lovely little terrier, always slept on her bed. And it was obviously guarding her. All this supernatural activity had spooked the dog, and it's barking, barking, barking. The farmer got up and he leapt up the stairs, 4 at a time. But he was too late. The only thing left in his daughter's bedroom was a mad, mad barking dog and an empty bed. The farmer was bereft. What am I to do? What am I to do? He decided that very night that he would return to old Sarah, the White Witch in the next village, and see what she said. So he donned his riding boots again, fetched his horse, and galloped off. That night he told old Sarah everything that had happened. She looked very worried, even more worried than she looked before. She said, tricky, tricky. Now look, she said, I have known of 2 occasions when a family have managed to retrieve a child from the fairy realm. Only 2, mind you. And it's very, very difficult. Said the farmer, what must I do? Well, she said, you must gather 3 presents for the fairy king. Now, the first present is a light that doesn't burn. Bearing in mind, this is a long time ago, and the only light that was available was a candle. So a light that doesn't burn. Then you must find a bird, a live bird with no bones in its body. And finally, you must take the limb from a living creature without spilling a drop of blood. That is what you must do. And you must then, at midnight, go to the hole where the fairy king, the entrance to his domain, and you must present him with these presents, and maybe he'll give you back your daughter. Right, said the farmer. Right. He got back on his boots, got back on his horse, and he started to head back home. And as he was riding, he was thinking, Where am I going to get a light that doesn't burn? What does it mean, a live bird with no bones in its body? And and how am I going to pull the limb off an animal without spilling any blood? And he rode and rode and rode and thought, this is actually quite impossible. It was daybreak by the time he returned to his own village. As he trotted along the road, he saw an old beggar man sat there, begging for pennies. He jumped down off his horse, had a reach in his pocket, he had some old coins, and he gave the beggar man some coins. There you go, he said. See if you can get some bread and cheese with those. All at once, the beggar, who had appeared to be quite drowsy and disinterested, stood up and was erect and said to the man, "Aha! Thank you for these coins. From a man who is weighed down by his troubles, I'll give you the answer to your first riddle. A light that doesn't burn is a glowworm, of course." With that, the beggar shimmered and disappeared. "Wow," said the farmer. "That was a bit unexpected." "Ah, glowworm. Yes, of course, of course, of course." So he got back on his horse and he continued back to his croft. Presently, he heard a flapping and a twitting and a twooing all over the place, and a thrush was trapped in a bush, and a hawk circled overhead, just waiting for the thrush to try and leave the bush and to pounce and to eat it. The farmer hated bullies, so he took a rock and he threw the rock at the thrush. Actually, he didn't. He threw the rock at the hawk, and the hawk flew off, and the thrush jumped out and said, "Aha! Thank you for rescuing me. I'm glad you didn't throw the rock at me. For that, a man with troubles of his own, I'll give you the answer to your second riddle. A bird that is alive but has no bones in its body is a hen, a little chick, inside its egg. 15 days old, it is alive but has no bones in its body." Oh, thought the farmer, that's really clever. I've got chickens all over the place. I'm bound to have a fertilized egg, 15 days old. With that, the thrush shimmered and poof, disappeared. "That's unusual," said the farmer. And he rode on, and presently he passed a rabbit caught in a snare, and the rabbit was pulling and pulling and obviously in great distress. Now the farmer hated to see animals in distress, so he jumped down off his horse and he released the rabbit from the snare. Now normally a rabbit will run off, but not this rabbit. It sat to the side of the road, cleaning its ears. "Ooh," it said, "thank you very much. A man with the weight of the world on his shoulders." And he stopped to release a mere rabbit. "I'll give you the answer to your third riddle. A lizard, if you pull at its tail, will release the tail, and no blood will be spilt. So go up into the hills and find yourself a lizard, grab its tail, and that will be your limb from a live animal and spill no blood." And You guessed it, the rabbit shimmered and disappeared. By now the farmer was used to it, although he did say, "Do you know what? That's unusual." He spent the rest of the day gathering these gifts. He found glowworms under the hedge. He found a lizard, grabbed its tail, pop, it came off. And he found some eggs, 15 days old, and ready to go. He took all of these gifts up into the hills where his daughter had been playing, collecting flowers. And he sat at midnight in a little cave and said in a forceful voice, Fairy King, you have my daughter. I have 3 gifts for you. Please release her." He heard a commotion, deep, deep under the ground, deep in the fairy realm. There was a commotion, and at length a very tiny but very well dressed and very regal king stepped out with his followers, hundreds and hundreds of followers round. "Aha, yes indeed, we have your daughter," said the king. But then he looked at the gifts that the farmer had laid out before him. "Wow," said he, and laughed. He gathered them all together and disappeared back into his realm. The farmer waited patiently in the dark. Then all of a sudden he heard laughter, and he heard footsteps, and his daughter appeared. She'd been returned from the fairy realm, no longer stolen by fairies. And that evening they ate together by the fire in the farmhouse, and she told the farmer all about what it was like to live in the fairy realm, and the dancing and the laughter. But she was glad to be home. That night she went to bed. And of course, the Jack Russell slept next to her, just to keep her safe. Thanks for listening.